at that point, you're not there to play it safe. Like if you're not taking risks, you're not competing.
It's empowering. I mean, anybody who's done a CrossFit workout, you finish your CrossFit workout and you're like, I'm on top of the world.
Yeah.
Like a hunger for competition and like that super intense structure, routine. I still had that desire.
Listen to the way people feel and the motivations for doing the things that they did. It was like they were describing me to a T.
I'm not trying to solve everything for you, but I know that sometimes you just need somebody to listen.
Learned the most is how to fill my cup by filling others.
Welcome to the Hungry Dog Barbell Podcast. Join me as I talk with passionate people about their life's failures and successes, and most importantly, what keeps them hungry for more. What up, dogs? Welcome back to another episode of the Hungry Dog Barbell Podcast. We're joined by another awesome guest. We have Kiersten McCartney. But Kiersten, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm pumped to be here. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. I'm glad to have you on. I met Kiersten. What was that? I was just talking with Lauren. It was actually at the adaptive course. Is in the other room right now. She's working. But she's got a session going on in about a half hour. I met Kiersten at the adaptive course 2 weeks ago now down at Riverfront.
That's actually the base where my colleague and I started some adaptive classes. So it pretty much just started as a member, and I wanted to bring adaptive fitness to Delaware. There aren't any classes like CrossFit classes except ours now. And I think that's growing, which is awesome. That's what we want to see. So, run some classes out of there now. But no, I'm not an official employee of CrossFit Riverfront.
Awesome. Yeah, you guys just work to run that program over there. So I'll let you kind of introduce yourself.
Yeah. So hey, everyone that's listening. Maybe just my mom, who knows? But I'm Kiersten. I like to consider myself an athlete and just real big fitness enthusiast, and I kind of live every day to just kind of bring health and wellness to people of all abilities. So from a career standpoint, I'm a physical therapist by trade. I used to be an exercise physiologist, and so I'm really into that kinesiology, how the body moves, the science aspect of training and all that. It's my jam. And I really like the intersection of sports and neuro rehab. So some people might refer to that as like adaptive athletics or adaptive sports. So that's kind of my jam. And right now I'm pursuing my PhD in biomechanics and human movement sciences at the University of Delaware. The lab I'm in is with Darcy Reisman, and she studies kind of has two aspects of the lab. One of them looks at motor learning in people with strokes. That's a little bit more nitty gritty basic science. And the other half of the lab looks more at physical activity and high intensity exercise in people with chronic stroke. So that's kind of the side of the lab that I'm in. So right now looking at a lot of heart rate data, VO2 data, and people with chronic stroke, and just trying to figure out kind of what can we do to help continue to push interventions like that out towards people with disabilities.
It's amazing, like so many different spheres of trying to make fitness accessible to different people, like on the adaptive side and people that have other things going on. So what does a regular Monday look like for you? You're on this call right now. What do you do? What'd you do before this? What are you doing after?
So all morning I was reading actually a bunch of articles. So I would say that every Monday for me can be different. The difference right now is we always have our adaptive classes on Monday nights. So that's a steady plug for me right now. But awesome. Life as a PhD student is very busy and also very flexible. So it's a little bit of a paradox. So I do have a lot of autonomy in my days, which is nice. And the summer is a great time to really kind of dive more into researching data. I only have one more class left in my PhD program, so I'll take that one in the fall. But yeah, right now it's just, we finished a 6-year clinical trial. So this clinical trial started before I even came to PT school, and it's over. And so this one was looking at kind of step activity, physical activity in people with stroke. And they also did high intensity exercise as part of a 12-week intervention. We have a ton of data. Like it's kind of crazy how much data there is. So
6 years, not bad.
Yeah. So all morning I've been reading a lot of papers just to kind of get a little bit better of the lay of the land and trying to further define the questions that I'm trying to ask and hopefully answer. So yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing. How far along were they in it already when you came aboard?
So I moved to Delaware from Chicago in June of 2018 to start PT school. And then I graduated PT school in December of 2020. And started the PhD that following February, so 2021. So I was like officially in the lab then, but my whole time in PT school, I've really been rotating in this lab. I kind of came here for my advisor I really liked the work that she was doing, and she's a great human and scientist to work for. So those were big pluses. So yeah, so I guess like they were probably 3 years into it, 3-ish years, by the time I kind of got into it. But everyone in the study we follow for a year. So they kind of come in, they'll do a 12-week intervention of some sort. We get pre-data, post-data, and then we follow them. We do a 6-month time point and a 12-month time point. So we have like over 250 people that were part of the study. So
wow,
it just takes a lot of years to get everybody through.
That's a long time to be studying something.
Yeah.
So like, what did you do your undergrad in? Did you say that already?
No, I went to Ohio State, so go Bucks. It doesn't usually bring me a lot of favors. But yeah, so I went there for undergrad. I studied biology. So I kind of have always been in kind of the health sciences, knew I want to kind of be in that realm. So yeah, did bio for undergrad.
And then PT school, that's like another 2 to 3 years, right? Somewhere around there. Yeah,
usually they're 3 years long. Delaware is 2.5. So yeah. But I took a gap from school.
How long is the PhD program? This is a lot of schooling. Were you always like a big learner? Did you always like love being in the the classroom?
Yeah, I'm a nerd. I mean, it took me a long time to, I feel like, fully embrace that, but I've always liked school. I'm very curious, I think, by nature. And so I like asking questions, and kind of the realm I'm in now, like, allows me to do that. My PhD will probably be 4 years. So I have about another 2.5 years left. So yeah.
That's awesome. I feel like being curious is the number one trait of a scientist, right? Like you need to do that. Like, and then especially when you're in the movement field, like studying the body, like seeing what's like actually going wrong, like going on with it, and like what changes you can make, how you can actually help someone, how can you like facilitate adaptation. You have to be curious to do all that,
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's no one size fits all. I feel like kind of no matter, I feel like what realm of the healthcare, so many times people are looking for that silver bullet. And then I think when you talk or read about the greatest coaches or listen to people who are kind of been in the field for a long time, there's that aspect of like the basics haven't changed. They still haven't changed. Like the consistency that you have to exercise, like that's all still there. And so, yeah, it's cool. It's fun to be curious. It's fun to tweak stuff and figure out what works best for a certain individual and given their conditions. And, that goes beyond the gym, right? Like what life stressors do they have going on? What's going on in the family? What's going on at work? And, all that 100%. Plays into training. So it is fun to tweak it all. And then it's important. I think it's like kind of that balance, that paradox. I feel like I'm always playing in that of like, what's a new way to tweak it? And then what's the way to like, just slow, steady consistency is really what makes growth happen.
For sure. So what was like young Kiersten like? Were you a sporty nerd, like when you were young? Like what sports did you play?
A little bit of everything. So I played like town soccer my whole life. Like I think from when I was 5 up, played t-ball. I'm the second kid of 4. So I'm between 2 boys and then, my sister. And both of the siblings that I'm between, neither one of them was very athletically inclined, but I would like get off the bus and like run home. Like I would run, it was probably 400 meters. I would run home all the time. So play a lot of sports. My grandma put me into gymnastics. So that was good. It was a lot of tumbling. One of my older cousins was doing gymnastics at the time. And then after I left gymnastics, the gym closed, I started diving because there were some girls from the gym that had turned to diving. And my elementary school, the 5th and 6th graders had a mile run. So they had this like very, after school program, and they would, we would run for 30 minutes and do some drills and stuff. But looking back, that was the basis for running for me. Cause then I ended up pursuing track and field. I ran track and field from 7th to 12th grade in high school, indoor and outdoor. And then I ran track in college for 2 years. So running definitely became my like main sport, I guess. Track and field was my main sport. And I'm a big I was a 4.8 runner. So yeah, I love the 800, which people are always like, that's crazy. But yeah. So I was always active. My mom jokes that I came out running and I never stopped. So
yeah, if you're running off the school bus, that's funny.
Yeah.
Did you do any other events? Like, did you do any triple jump, high jump, things like that?
Yeah, actually both those, triple jump, high jump. I dabbled in
those are usually like the 800 people too, right around there.
I wish I had done more 400 meter hurdles, or honestly, looking back, I should have done multi events, but I grew up in New York, and in New York, if you do the multi events, you can't do the relays. And I was like, I love the relays. And so I would run 4x8, 4x4. And so I think for me, it was kind of like part of being on the team mattered more to me than like doing multis. I kind of wish in college I'd maybe like made the switch over, because sometimes I look at that and I'm like, oh, that would have been cool to like do all the bunch of different things. And now that I've been doing CrossFit for a year, it's kind of fun to think about like all the different ways that the multi events in track and field, like it's all those different disciplines. You got to have strength, you got to have power, you got to have speed, so yeah, who knows?
What about javelin? Did you ever try that?
I threw the javelin in college.
Man, now that's what I wish that I had done. The javelin, that looks so much fun.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. Like when the first time I picked it up, it's like a literal spear, and you're just kind of like, I can't believe this is a sport, but it was fun. Yeah. Yeah.
I threw shot put like all throughout high school and a little bit of discus too. But like looking back, I was like, man, I wish that I had thrown the javelin. That looks like so much fun. Like, such a pure like output of power right there.
It's very similar to like drills and stuff that we would do is very similar to like pitchers and quarterbacks. So the throw is similar. It's obviously a different implement, but as far as like, especially pitchers, right? Every time they pitch a ball, they're essentially like throwing their arm out of their socket. It's just, they're strong and they can handle that. Javelin's like very similar. It's like the whole body is just powering right to launch that as far as it can. So when you watch the pros do it, it's crazy how much power you can get behind that.
Think about what they're doing in that moment. Just like you said, throwing the arm out of the socket. Yeah, that's nuts to think about.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself a competitive person? Like, were you back then and are you now?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think I'm competitive in certain aspects, and then other aspects, like I can be like super chill, but I am competitive. Like even at the gym this morning, I don't know. I have a good friend that I work out with, and I love working out with her, but her and I are competitive. Like we joke, we're like, I'll be like, I won the workout today, so just make sure you write it in your journal and stuff. So we'll like joke about that stuff. And
like Monday, July 11th, Kiersten beat me.
Yeah. But yeah, I think I've always been really competitive. And I think, post college, you're competitive against other people, but I was a big runner. I mean, I'm always going to be a runner, but it really, for me, turned into like competing against myself. And I think, training for marathons and stuff was like super helpful. And that was just like watching the progression, like over like season to season, because you can't really run too many marathons in a year. And so I don't know. It's kind of like learning of like how I could build from season to season, and then just being more competitive with myself in the race, like both mentally and physically. Right. So like, hey, this race went wrong, but I kind of gave up at like mile 17. Like, what could we adjust next time? Or like, how can I face those mental demons? Like when they come in a different way. And so for me, it's almost like now it's become like, how can I be better than I was, a week ago or a year ago or something like that. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. You how many marathons have you run in your life?
7 or 8, I think.
That's so many miles there. Where does your brain go when you're running there? You were just kind of talking about it, but like, do you listen to music, or are you just like one of those psychos that just runs?
I'm a psycho that just runs, but I honestly
that just runs.
I think it's because I started running when I was like, 10, and headphones and things weren't a thing back then, right? I do remember, I feel like there was one summer where some of us were like trying to run with those like bigger Sony headphones, and
you could have been like one of the moms with the cassette tapes on your side.
Like the CD player. You're like running with this big old thing. Like,
too heavy.
Yeah, so I feel like I didn't grow up running with that, and so for me, I'll go for a run to get out any type of emotion, like super angry, right, to like super elated. A run will like kind of level those emotions out. So yeah, I think honestly, some days I get back, I'm like, what did I think about? But I've done like crazy things on runs. Like I've like done like, okay, what am I going to say to this person? Whatever. I'll think about that stuff. I like wrote I gave a speech at my brother's wedding. I like wrote that on a run because I was like thinking about it, and I was okay, what am I going to say?
Like your mojo zone. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I have a group of friends from Chicago that I met when I started marathon training, and we're really good friends now. And we just joke that like when you have to run, 15 to 20 miles together, you learn a lot about each other. Like because it's a lot of time. You got a lot of time, and like somebody's got to fill it. So sometimes we would like, someone would be like, oh, I have a really good story for like this weekend. And we would just like save it, and then we could just chat it out because we got like 3 hours, and then, we go and brunch it up afterwards. So you get to know people pretty well when you have that many miles to run.
Yeah. I just thought of the term, when you're that locked in, right? When you could do all those things in like that kind of state, they call it like a flow state, right? Where like you feel like you're operating at a higher level. Do you like feel like you do anything else that bring you to that flow state besides running? Like, do you feel in that mode anywhere else?
For me, a lot of times it's fitness related. I think the key with the flow state for me is it's not necessarily those workouts that are like all out. Cause I think it's almost like that's too physically taxing. So you're almost like thinking more on that. It's more when it's like those, like for me, those easier runs, or like if you're hopping on a bike or a row or whatever, and it's more like the steady pace for a while, like that's going to put me in the flow. I mean, this morning I said I was like reading a bunch of articles. There was twice today that I like got up out of my, little cubicle, and I just walked downstairs in the building, like for 10-15 minutes, just like, okay, I read that. Let me try and like walk and digest it. So yeah, for me, it's movement. If I don't work out, I'm like jittery at my desk all day.
Yeah, I had a dude on the podcast before. He was like, he moved like across the country, and when he got there, he was like went like 8 months without working out just because he got so busy. And like his close friends and family were like, "Dude, you're like an asshole to be around right now," And he looked up. He was like, "Dude, I haven't worked out in so long, and that's what's doing it to me." So it's really funny how exercise can be so attached to our like emotional state like that.
Yeah.
So back to being competitive, do you think you're competitive in the lab? I mean, I know it's about like curiosity and bettering the world almost, but do you ever find yourself being competitive?
I think actually I actively almost try to be the opposite. God, how do you explain that? So I really believe in collaboration, and so there's a lot that, one person can do, but there's so much that we don't know in science across the board. And even when I like pump it down to like my little niche, there's not many other people working in it. And I think if you are competitive to a fault, you just end up pushing away other people who you can have really cool discussions with that help like further the question or give you a new perspective on it. So I would say the PhD program I'm in is pretty competitive in the sense that there's a lot of high achieving people in it. And a lot of the, principal investigators at UD are getting big grants. And so that's competitive. And so there's aspects of the field where you have to be competitive, right? Like there's not limitless grants, and like you have to write the grants and get the money. And so you have to get good at that. But I think that just falls back to like, I have to learn how to become a really good grant writer, and I have to learn how to like really understand statistics so I can like look at stuff in a new way, and I have to improve my skills. So I think it just actually comes back to, again, like being more competitive of like, how can I make myself better, but not at the expense of someone else, and keeping kind of the avenues open. So I have like my one lab mate, she actually just successfully defended her dissertation, and she is so smart, and she has like elevated my game because she's been so willing to like answer any questions I have and have these interesting discussions. And like when we have topics that we are both interested in, but we kind of come at them from different ways, it's so cool, like the type of conversations we can have. So I'm competitive in the field, but again, it's not at like I'm trying to beat you. Like it's more like I'm trying to beat me, and like that, I think that's ultimately what's going to lead to like the success.
Yeah, everybody being in the room, like at a like vibrating high, just keeps elevating the whole room, right? That's awesome to go through. So, what made you pursue like the health sciences in the very beginning when you went to college?
Honestly, I just think it was like I was always like intrigued by the human body. And like, I think it was partially because I was like athletic and I liked science. And so, I mean, growing up, I had people who were like, you should go into medicine. And so I think you're kind of a kid and that stuff happens, and you kind of have things you like.
This sounds good.
Yeah. And I did jujitsu growing up. I guess I didn't say that. And so,
well, that's awesome.
Yeah. So my sensei was super into like exercise physiology and kinesiology. And then my track coach would also read up on a lot of like science-based stuff. And so I feel like kind of from multiple angles, like I was doing the sport and I was so intrigued. Like I love training. I was all about like the numbers, like, oh, I ran this split today. Like these are what my 200 splits were, But then I had these people who were like, they were reading the science and trying to apply it or like talking about it. And so I think it was kind of there that I was like, this is cool. Like I honestly went to college. I thought I was going to go to med school was kind of like the original goal. So yeah, I think just like being active and liking science kind of pushed me in that direction. And then my anatomy class in college, I took that, I think it was the end of my junior year. I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like, I know some people don't like the cadaver lab and stuff, but the human body is like, I just think it's like super cool. And so kind of seeing that in the musculoskeletal system and then the nervous system, I was like, oh, this is great. And then when I walked into my exercise science class my senior year, I just remember like walking in and I was like, oh, these are my people. Like
It kind of
everyone
all
was
put together,
wearing,
right? Yeah.
well, no, everyone was wearing like athletic clothes and like clearly everyone was like working out. And I was like, oh, these are my people. And then we talked about like, you know, exercise and what that does to the body and all these different ways. So
Yeah.
that kind of for me was like a big push. So yeah.
That's amazing. I want to get right back to that, but how did you get into jujitsu? Like, you don't see a lot of like teen girls just going and starting that. Does anyone else in your family do like martial arts?
Yeah, actually. So I grew up in the same hometown that, well, my dad, I think I'm like the 5th generation in my family who's like lived there. So my dad somehow knew my sensei and I can't remember why, but he had like known him growing up as a kid too. And I think he maybe did like jujitsu for a year or two. But that was actually the one thing my dad made us do. So all of my siblings and I all did jujitsu. And so you could start when you were 6. So we were like all put in when we were 6. And, yeah, my dad was kind of like, I just want to make sure that you guys like know how to defend yourself. And I think he really believed in, like I said, there was like exercise science side of it for me that was cool, but there were some faith aspects that were like pulled into it. And I think my dad appreciated that. And so, yeah, he was kind of like, this is the only thing I'm ever going to make you guys do. And so, yeah, so kind of did jujitsu from when I was 6 to when I was 18. I tested for my black belt right before I went off to college. And so I think there was someone who said something to my parents about like, you can't be too worried about her like going off on her own. And my dad was like, no, I'm not really worried.
I'm not worried at all. I was just watching a video literally over the weekend about self-defense and how important all that is. I've never done jujitsu, but like all my friends are slowly starting to fall like into it. You know, it's like dominoes, like
it's so popular right now.
I'm like, oh man, like I want to get into it now, but so busy with CrossFit. I feel like I can find the time though.
Well, it's funny. Sorry, just to say this part. So it makes me think. So, I mean, so I did it from when I was 6 to when I was like 18 formally. And I remember when I was studying for my black belt test. So the test for us was like 6 hours long.
Yeah.
It's called Tangyana Jiu-Jitsu. And there was like a 2-hour physical test. And then there was then it was like, we had board breaking and there was sparring and there was like all the tests of your skills and everything. And I remember when I was training for running at that time, I would be like running and I would think like, okay, what am I going to do if someone attacks me from this way? What am I going to do if someone attacks me from this way? And so like when you're talking about the flow state before, like now that I'm like, oh yeah, I like kind of forgot that I did that. Like, I would be on my run and I'd be like, okay, I could do this and then I could do that. And like, it's kind of wild to think back. That feels like so long ago.
Yeah. And that's the exact flow state right there, right? Like you're able to multitask, like you're doing this, accomplishing this task. And it's like it's heightening your senses, you know?
Yeah.
Which is a funny thing to think about. For me, running right now, it's the opposite of that. It depreciates all my senses. But you kind of answered it before, right? Like you were thinking, well, I'll go into the medical field some kind of way. When you're first entering college or in your undergrad, what did you think you were going to like do with your life? What did you think you would do like in the medical field?
I thought MD. That was kind of that was my goal for a bit. I think it was like the summer between my junior and senior year. I had a friend who was like a newer friend at the time, and I was getting ready to like study for the MCAT and start applying and all this stuff. And I was still kind of sold on it, but I think I had been questioning it more than I was like willing to admit, because it was like I wasn't quite sure that's what I wanted to pursue. But it's almost like when you don't have the other option, you're like afraid to take the leap. And I was certainly afraid to kind of let go of something without knowing like what was the next step. And so I think she looked at me and she was like, you are one of like the most passionate, excited people. And then the moment you start talking about med school, you're like a sad puppy dog. And it was kind of like someone looking at you and like being a mirror for you almost. And so I kind of took a step back, and that's when I took a couple exercise science classes my senior year. And that's when I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like, this is what I like. And so after I graduated college, I always loved school. And so I moved to Chicago and I pursued my master's in kinesiology, because I had done some basic exercise science classes in undergrad, but I was a bios undergrad major. So I had done a little bit more on we did stuff with like animals and plants and everything like that. And I think by the end of my time, I was like, yeah, that's cool. But like, I like studying people. So then I went and pursued my master's in exercise science, loved the content, thought I was going to get my PhD then, but was kind of like, didn't totally love the lab I was in. And it wasn't as clinical as I wanted it to be. So I actually was like, you know what, I'm going to pursue medical school for the sake of, I think I'll always question it for the rest of my life if I don't. And now I was like pretty sure that's what I wanted to do. And then over the course of 2 years, I got rejected from about 45 medical schools, like straight rejections, like took the MCAT a couple times, like called all the schools. And ultimately, like in kind of that whole time frame was when I fell more into the like healthcare, health field kind of way, where I started my own coaching business and I started personal training, and I worked like teaching group fitness classes. And then I started working at a rehab hospital in Chicago called the Shirley Ryan AbilityLab as an exercise physiologist. And that was that moment where it was like, this is sports and this is neuro and this is so cool.
Yeah, kind of all connected for you right there. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Were you like working out at that time period? Actually, before I even ask that, like you spent a lot of time doing different disciplines of like exercise. Were you ever in the weight room during that time, like during track and jujitsu?
Yeah. So high school, no. I mean, I'd been in a weight room, but like once or twice. I trained with the distance crew, and my coach, we did a lot of strength training, but it was all body weight. And I will give him credit. Like we were rarely injured. So he kept us healthy. When I went to college and I was competing in track and field, that's when I like learned like all the Olympic and powerlifting moves. And I loved it. So even when I left the team at the end of my sophomore year, like I would still go to the gym, and I that's when I like really fell in love with lifting.
Yeah.
And then when I moved to Chicago, I was like running, like after I saw the Chicago Marathon in 2013, like I was like, I got to do this next year. So I was like running a lot. And then kind of when like, cause I had the access to the gym where I was going to school. So I would like strength train like 2 days a week, kind of just like put my own stuff together and kind of track stuff there. And kind of basically from there, it grew. Like I was primarily a runner until 2019 was like the last marathon I ran was New York City in 2019. And I joked with people, even going into that marathon, I was like, no marathons in 2020. And I really just meant that for me. And now I joke, I'm like, I'm sorry, guys. I didn't mean that for everybody. Like I just meant that for me. Like, so sorry, I willed that a little bit too hard. And then I was lucky enough that I had kind of been building some weights of my own over the course of time. And so lucky for me in COVID, I have a decent garage gym. So that's when I kind of started dabbling a little bit more in CrossFit and just like the movements and stuff like that. And I didn't belong to a gym at that point, but you know, there's so many workouts you can throw together that are CrossFit style, or they have so many workouts that you can find. And then I joined the RIV in June of 2021. So it's been about a year now that I've been doing CrossFit. So yeah.
That's awesome.
I've never stopped moving, I guess, if that's your question.
Yeah, you keep going. It's just, you always get curious, like, especially people that have gone to PT school. Like, did you ever weightlift before PT school? What's your relationship like with the barbell? Like, do you put that in your practice for like rehab, prehab patients, you know, all those things? And most of them now in 2022, I should say this actually, if you're in 2022 and you're a physical therapist or any kind of like exercise doctor or specialist, and you don't have people lifting some kind of weights, you don't have to do a squat clean or a snatch. Like, I don't really care about that. You don't have to do CrossFit, but if you're not lifting some kind of weights, you know, if you don't have loaded movements that you're doing, you're missing out. I'm not saying that you're wrong, but you're definitely missing out on some kind of the practice, you know?
No, it's it's certainly a problem in the field. You know what I mean? And I think there's some programs across the country where students actually, it's almost like a practicum class where they're in the weight room and they're designing programs. And I think that's huge. Like I joke that I grew up in a locker room, you know, and I did, but because of that, right? Like I can talk to different people. I don't know the ins and outs of every sport. I don't know what it's like to play every sport, right? But I can have a conversation with someone who's, you know, an active adult or someone who's in a sport, you know, and I think that is important. I think being comfortable with those types of movements, you know, to your point, as a physical therapist, like you should, if we're supposed to be the movement specialist, then you got to own that. And so I think for me, it's always like actions speak louder than words. So for me, it's like, that's going to be a part of it. And for me always. And I think, you know, to your point, if you are seeing a practitioner and you're an active person and you're not doing movements that in some way mimic or are on a path to being what you want to get back to, then go find yourself a different therapist, because they're out there. You know, there's plenty of good therapists out there, but find them. My one friend jokes that if you don't have kettlebells in your clinic, to get a new job. So that's what 100%. We say to other people in the field.
100%, because kettlebells just make like loaded movement accessible to like so many people, right?
Yeah.
Like the barbell could be limiting like to just a certain demographic, like so kettlebell is even more easier and accessible. I've had so many more PTs on here say that they're leaving their private practices, they're in office jobs because there's a lack of like loaded movements, kind of what we're talking about, and they're going to start their own thing or changing like directions in the field. It's sad to see, but it's happy to see like those things happening, progressing that way.
Yeah.
And you need both, right? You need the education from like anatomy and kinesiology, like to a high level, to be able to understand what they need as far as adaptation, rehab, whatever's going on. Because you don't need to be like a sports specific expert to be able to be like their strength and conditioning person, right? Like I don't know a lot about like hockey or like tennis, but if an athlete comes to me and they're like, hey, I need to get stronger in these areas, well, these are things that we can do to make you stronger there, or I'm having deficiency in these areas. It's like, oh, well, these are the things we need to do, like to help you progress or regress from wherever you are,
Yeah, absolutely.
And strength and conditioning, that's just where it all comes from,
And I mean, that's the thing is like, sometimes and this is not by any means for all therapists out there, but to me, like rehab and strength conditioning, they're the same things. They're just on a continuum, right? And so it's like, maybe at the one end, it's like you're just getting out of surgery. And so like, maybe you're seeing a physical therapist, but like ultimately that's on a continuum. So it shouldn't be that there's this like either gap or like huge difference in like what you're seeing in a PT clinic versus what you're seeing in a strength and conditioning room. Eventually there's going to get to a point where it's like, there really are overlapping. It's almost a gray zone of like, maybe you're starting to be back in the gym or strength and conditioning room and you're still seeing your therapist, but probably less often. And so again, it's like finding that continuum and just making sure that, from the rehab standpoint, you're setting people up for success. And that is, getting them back to where they want to be.
Exactly. Like two perfect examples. If you have, let's take an NFL player, right, who is at peak performance for their season, they're highly conditioned, they're super strong, they're doing all their lifting stuff, they're doing their drills. If they're not also doing prehab things for their joints for next season, then they're missing out. And on the other side of that, if you have a 70-year-old man who has who's just out of knee surgery or hip replacement, something like that, if they're not doing some sort of loaded thing to strengthen the knee so that it doesn't happen again, then he's also missing out, right? So they're 100%. On the same line. They're 100%. On the same line, two different places, but trying to get the same goal. So how does PT school go? Like, how was it for you? Were you still in love with movement the whole time while you were in it?
Oh yeah, I was. I mean, I would say so. There was a 5-year gap from when I graduated undergrad to when I started PT school, and so I think I definitely benefited from being out in quote the real world for a little bit and working, and like when I chose to go back to school, like I knew why I wanted to go. And I was like, I knew the people I wanted to work, the type of people I wanted to work with. I kind of was like, I know that this is what I want to do. So I never had questions kind of regarding that when it got tough. I mean, PT school is hard. Yeah. And when it got tough, as far as like, academics are hard, or there's a lot of volume, or there's a lot coming at you at once. And there can be a lot of stress around it. For me, it was like, I just know this is what I want to do. And so I was able to focus on a patient that I had worked with in the past or an athlete that I was still working with and just be able to be like, this is why I want to come back. I wanted to get more knowledge. I wanted to be able to be a better provider for people. So it was tough, but I mean, I would say to me, it's like, you can study, right? I would study, but when I was getting to a point where it's like, you're kind of spinning your wheels, like I would go work out or go for a walk or, make dinner or something, because let's say you've got it up to where you're going to get like a 90% on the exam, right? Like that to me is solid, right? It's going to take me so much more time to get that last 10%. And not that I'm like, ditching out before it's hard, but it's kind of like, okay, like now I'm going to go get a good night's sleep because I'm going to make sure I'm prepared versus like getting 2 hours of sleep. And then, it just kind of messes with you. So, I mean, PT school, I was like doing doubles all the time. Like I would wake up and run before class and we'd be in class like 8 to 4, 8 to 5. And you're sitting for so long, which was like, for me, it was tough. And I'd go home and I'd do like a 30-minute strength workout. And then I would study because it was kind of like get the energy out and get my mind ready to go for the morning. But then after you're sitting for that long, like, at least for me, like I couldn't go home and just sit and study, like couldn't focus on anything. So, yeah.
Yeah. What made you pursue neuro? Like what attracted you to that?
Yeah. So it started, I'll kind of give you two aspects of the story, but when I was kind of like at that point after grad school and I was applying to med school and it was not working out, I ended up getting a part-time job at the Shirley Ryan AbilityLab, which is a rehab hospital in Chicago. My job started by teaching group fitness classes to people with Parkinson's disease. And I just like kind of fell in love with that population. And then my part-time job very quickly turned into full-time. And so I was still teaching the group classes, but I also was doing one-on-one training. And everyone that came to the Adaptive Sport and Fitness Center has some sort of disability, primarily physical disabilities. To come to basically get a membership at the gym, you would have to fall in the Paralympic classification scheme.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like a very loose way that we would, have members join. So I worked with a lot of people who have stroke, spinal cord injury, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, a couple patients with like traumatic brain injury, ALS. I worked with some people who had some amputations. And so it was kind of through that job that I was just like, oh, this is, it's exercise, it's fitness, which I love. And it had this extra piece of helping people who don't always get the opportunity, I feel like, to capitalize on their health, and they don't have as many opportunities, or they have a lot more barriers within the community to get involved. And that for me was like, at the same time I was working at a gym in Chicago, and I would teach, fitness classes there, have personal training clients there. And then I would come to my full-time job. And for me, it was kind of that same, we were just talking about another spectrum. For me, it's like everybody is on this spectrum of how fit they are, what they have to adapt. We're all adapting in some way. And so I was constantly having this like great interplay, even in my mind, of like, all right, I did this lunge, right? Let's say with a client in the morning, this patient, like we're trying to work on similar things. Maybe they can't do an exact lunge, or maybe I have to raise their front foot or their back foot or give them a slider, or like they just need to hold on to something. But again, it's kind of those same principles of like fitness. They don't change, right? It was just adapting to what someone's ability level is, and 100%. Then playing with it to make sure they're getting this like a stimulus and the right challenge. And so when I was at my old job at Shirley Ryan, I worked with a ton of PTs, and I started getting pulled over to the main hospital to sometimes work with some other patients, and everyone thought I was a physical therapist, and we'd be like, no, like I'm not, I'm not. And I was willing to own that. And they were funny. Like, oh, I would have like never known, cause what we did was so similar. And that's when I was like, I would start talking to more PTs, and they had more of, academic educational background. And I was doing a ton of like one on the job learning, but like I would go read stuff because I was like, oh, I want to figure this out. Like, how do you help someone with a stroke who like you can't have a full conversation with because they have some sort of aphasia? Like, are there ways to work on that? Like, what's a strategy to talk to them? I would, and so it was kind of a mix of all of that I was like, you know what? I know that this is like the field I want to be in. Like for me, it was like, I was almost grateful at that point that all the med schools said no, because I was like, this is where I'm supposed to be.
That's a blessing.
And it was such like a moment of like, those doors were never meant to open, and those closed doors led me here. But that was kind of where like, for me, it was like neuro and sports kind of intersected. And sorry, I'm like going to ramble for a little bit, but
I love it.
The back of this, and, I didn't think about this growing up. And so even at that point when I was in my job, like I was thinking about it, but my best friend's dad, was in a car accident when we were about 5, and he sustained a spinal cord injury. And so he was a super active guy. He was a firefighter, was in construction, like hiking, played a lot of sports, very active. That's obviously like a life-changing event. And, so I grew up around someone who had some sort of physical disability, but, you're 5. So you kind of like, it is what it is. It's kind of the norm. Yeah. And I have realized, especially over the past probably 5, 6, 7 years, whatever, like that really impacted me in ways that I didn't recognize. Like Pete to me could do anything. And I never saw Pete as being limited. And Pete, like, so like strong and steadfast. He played wheelchair basketball with the New York Knicks affiliate team. He played wheelchair tennis. He played wheelchair softball. We went to concerts. Like Pete did everything. And so I guess I never had this like perception that someone with a different physical ability was unable to do things. Now, granted, you get older and you realize like barriers that are in the community or in society that, I've had very interesting discussions with Pete about like even sidewalks, right? And buildings that aren't accessible. And so you realize they're there, but I think that's where a lot of my drive has even come to now of like, he has said like wheelchair basketball saved my life. And, I think about that. And with the adaptive program for me, like coming from my old job, I was so used to having like daily interactions with people, and I called them my athletes. And coming to PT school was great. It was what I knew I wanted to pursue, but simultaneously I was in the classroom for 8 hours a day. And so I was now lacking that like patient interaction. And it was not the time when I was in PT school to start classes, but I was intrigued as to why there really weren't many adaptive sport, fitness, any opportunities in the Delaware area. Baltimore's got a great program. Philly has programs, but there was kind of this like disconnect. And I was like, well, I knew I was staying for my PhD. So towards the end of PT school, I just started, reaching out to professors, reaching out to people in the area. Angela Smith, who we run the classes together at the RIV. She was actually my clinical instructor when I was in the sport and orthopedic clinic, Delaware. And I knew she was involved in the adaptive sports special interest group as part of the American Physical Therapy Association. So I went to her and was like, do you know of any opportunities? Do you know how this has, been? And then through COVID, Ange and I became very close. And, we kind of just started planting this seed of like, well, why don't we do it in our own community? And so as, COVID, started to
ease up a little bit.
Yeah, ease up a little bit. I joined the RIV, and, kind of immediately it was like, I wanted to join. I was like, all right, like, let's get these classes off the ground. So sorry, that was like a long, like whirlwind of like, it wasn't until my job in Chicago when I realized that's why I wanted to pursue neuro, which I think was your original question. And then
that was awesome.
There's a background of like, I do have a personal connection, even if I didn't fully realize it until later on. But, I think it intersects it for me. And then I know the benefits like personally that we get from physical exercise. You get it physically, you get it mentally, you get it emotionally. We've talked about all those things. And then we all have a community, right? Like I joined the gym because I wanted a community. I wasn't making friends in my garage gym. And so I think those are such solid things that I personally think we all need in life. And I think what can happen in the gym transcends like out of the gym, and it transcends into society. And I think, how can I do my little part? How can I play my piece in like building the kind of society that I want to live in? And that is one that's more inclusive and gives people of all abilities the chance to thrive in the gym and outside of the gym. And so we all know how it feels when you pick up something heavy and you put it back down and you see progress over time. Like you did that. That is like your work that you put in. And I just think I just think that goes beyond the gym, right? Like the confidence that you get and the self-empowerment that you get, like that leaves the gym, and then people can use that in so many different ways in their own life. And so let's give people that potential. Like let's give people that chance to see what they're made of, and who knows what'll happen.
It's just like listening to the story about Pete. That was his name, right? It sounds like he was a guy that never felt limited before, right? He was a go-getter guy that did a lot of things. And he probably had people around him that kind of took away that sensation in his brain that like, oh, now you're more limited. Like he felt like he could still do a lot of the same things. And I know that when I first got into training and fitness, I wanted to be able to provide it to like everyone. I want to be able to share what people share with me as far as that feeling you get after you get a sense of accomplishment from doing like a workout, stuff like that. And I never thought about it before, but when I was driving home from the adaptive course, I'm like, wow, like it's been a long time since I felt like I can now offer this to even more people. How did it get started at the RIV? I know you were talking about you wanted to get it done. Like where did you guys first start at like making the plan to bring an adaptive class there?
It was honestly like Ange and I ended up, her kids called me like their Corona buddy. Cause I was kind of solo. I didn't have any roommates in COVID and stuff. And so like, we were the bubble, right? Like we were the bubble, and I kind of like joined their family,
You're like, hey, you want to be friends?
Well, yeah, I literally was like, do you need help with the kids? They're like, cause they, young kids home from school, and you got 2 adults, full-time job. And I was kind of finishing up school, but I had some more time. So I'd come help the kids with school a little bit. And then, one thing leads to another, but that's a whole nother story. But like, it was through that, Ange and I were both interested in adaptive sports, and adaptive CrossFit, like had kind of come across, I think it must have been like December of 2020. Yeah. when Alec and the Adaptive Training Academy kind of put out their community calls when they were kind of building the first iteration of the Adaptive Athlete Handbook to try and just get CrossFit to be on board with having the official adaptive divisions. And they had some community calls where it's like anyone could log into these Zoom calls. And so I think like Adaptive CrossFit was kind of like making a change. And I had been like, I think I want to join a gym, like once stuff starts opening up. And then it's like, again, it's like you kind of keep percolating on it a little bit. And then you're like, all right, like I'm going to come check out the gym. And then I was like, I think this space would be perfect. The head coach was behind us and we asked the owners and the owners were like, yeah, like no sure. So we just trialed it and we joked because we're like, okay, we'll do like an 8-week series, 1 day a week. We'll just pump the word out. And we had talked to, other people who had started classes in different places. And this one guy in particular out in San Francisco was like, you just have to keep showing up. And he's like, be prepared that no one's going to be there. And so we literally got it in our heads. We're like, if we get one athlete by like week 4, we'll be like so pumped, so excited. We had like 3 or 4 athletes on the first day. And it was kind of like, whoa. And we got like 1 new athlete every week. So that was just like so cool to see like, okay, it's not that these athletes aren't out there. It's like there wasn't necessarily an opportunity. And so it's, again, like our mindset is just kind of like, it's not my full-time job, right? Like, but how can I bridge the gap for the athletes to come into the gym and then the athletes to feel more comfortable, but also like the coaches to feel more comfortable, right? So it can be intimidating. Like, you walk through the adaptive training class, like it's intimidating for anybody to walk into the gym, right? Like it doesn't matter what your ability level is. If like you don't know anyone, you're walking in for the first time, like everybody's got some sort of hesitation or concern. And I think sometimes that can be, more if you're like, well, I'm going to roll up to the gym. And what if this coach has never worked with someone who uses a wheelchair, or I have a prosthetic? Are they going to treat me differently, put me in the corner, not know what to do to me, just make everything super easy because they don't know what to do? And then it's like this, it can come from both sides. And so Ange and I were like, we want to kind of be that like, hey, we have experience working with adaptive athletes, have no concern, like talking to you, getting to understand like kind of where you are and where you want to go. Cause that, that's rehab, right? We eval new patients all the time. Where are you? Where do you want to go? Okay, this is the pathway we're going to go to get there. So it's kind of the same thing for the adaptive athletes. But what's been cool is we have a couple athletes now who they come to our classes, but they also go to the gym on their own time. And there's definitely been this like influx of coaches who feel more comfortable, and the athletes also feel more comfortable, right? So they've been empowered. They know movements. They know what they've been doing. They have a better understanding of the weights that they're going to use. And so it's been cool to see that, because that's the goal, right? Like I don't own a gym and I don't work at a gym all the time like you do, but knowing that there's people like you out there who are like taking the classes, have the knowledge, and are like opening up more and more spaces, like that's the goal, is like, so be working out with anyone, you know what I mean? And I think, I'll tell one story that Ange and I say is her son is 10 and he's helped us out with the classes. Like he's like grew up in a gym, right? Like he loves being active. He plays all these sports. We also have an adaptive athlete that comes. He has all 4 limbs are amputated. And the coolest thing is watching Owen and Chase work out together. And I have sometimes looked at that and I'm like, this is so cool, because this is like changing the game, right? Like Chase, we don't treat him any differently than we treat Owen. But Owen is growing up working out with Chase, who is different than him physically, but they're doing the same workout. They push each other. And so for Owen, when he grows up, is there the chance that like he's in a gym with someone who has a prosthetic, and it, like me, right, with Pete, it doesn't faze him because that's normal, right? Like, and so I'm like, well, is that the change, right? Like I'm kind of getting chills, like thinking about it, but like, you know what I mean? The more it becomes normalized, right? Which I'm like, we should already be there. We're not, but we're getting there, right? So the more people that work out of all ability levels next to one another, the less it appears to be this like, wow, that's so cool that you're doing this. It's like, it is cool that they're doing it. And it's also like, well, they're working out and you're working out. It's kind of the same thing. So it's really that interplay, which is cool. So,
and another aspect of it, like I'm sure probably 70 of those people that are in the course, like may one day go on and start a gym or be partners in a gym or head coaches somewhere, like in any kind of facility. And one thing they'll walk away from, like I know myself, is like when you're planning to open your gym, you won't just think about like the logos and the paint. You'll think about things like, how do people enter into my building, right? Do I have a ramp? Like, is it just stairs? Like, is my floor nice and flat? Like, is this heat controlled, temp controlled in here? Things that people never would have thought about it, or most likely never would have thought about if they hadn't taken that course, you know? Like,
yeah.
And those are, even if they never started adaptive, like actual class at their gym, like those will be things that are on their checklist now, you know?
Yeah.
Which is amazing to get to. So what's next? What are you guys hungry for that class, for your own journeys, like in growing the inclusivity of fitness?
I just think it's still getting the word out. And so like we're in our 4th iteration now of this, like we've done an 8-week series. This is our 4th one now. And, or wait, this is our 5th one, summer, winter. Yeah. So this is our 5th one. And I would say like it almost took a year to really feel like things were breaking, if that makes sense. And by that, I mean like the wave breaking. So like, I mean, I have emailed so many people for, you know, a year now. And like after our first series, we're like, okay, there's athletes, like, cool. We have athletes. All right. How do we grow this? How do we expand this? You know, how do we reach one more person? And so I just like looked up all like prosthetics, orthotics, you know, PT clinics. I've talked to a couple survivor groups, right? Like or support groups, and just been like, hey, this is where we are. This is who we are. This is what we're doing. You're always welcome. First class free. Come on out. Just check it out. And it took really like a solid 9 months before I feel like we've moved beyond like the first layer of people that were more like, I somehow personally knew them. It's now moved to like, oh, my doctor told me about this class, or like, oh, my prosthetist told me about this class. And that has been so cool. And I have one woman who actually lives in my neighborhood. She's a prosthetist, and she texted me a couple weeks ago and was like, I've gotten forwarded your email about your classes 3 times now. And that to me is like, okay, that just means like the word is getting out, more people know about it. And the more, you know, providers that know about it, the more athletes that'll hopefully know about it. And, you know, even having the Adaptive Training Academy come to the Riv, right? Like I got to network with people like yourself who are close enough, right? And so like, if you and I ever want to like, or like someone reaches out to me, but they're closer to you at King of Prussia, it's like, hey, like I have someone that I can send them to. And the barrier of them having to drive, you know, 40 minutes to me is no longer a barrier, because there's another solid provider right by them that I can send them to, and know like they're going to get challenged. They'll have a good, you know, they will have a good experience. So yeah, I guess we're hungry to just like keep growing the awareness of it, keep growing the size of our classes, and just keep having more athletes come into the door is what we're hungry for.
That's amazing. Like I even had like 2 or 3 people come up to me throughout the whole weekend, like, oh yeah, where are you located? Like if I know anyone out there, because they're just outside of PA or they're just outside the city, you know, and they might like know someone closer. They're like, oh yeah, would it be okay if I send them to you? You know, like, and you talk about like, oh wow, this is a really good opportunity to be able to do this. If I know anyone that's looking for a gym that they can feel comfortable in, like I can send them to you. You know,
yeah.
An awesome like just output and outcome of the weekend, you know?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Kiersten, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's been a great episode. Like I feel like I learned so much about you, and like just what kind of makes your brain tick. You know, this has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Heck yeah. Do you have anything else you want to say at the end of the episode before we get out of here?
Just if anyone's, you know, interested in learning more about adaptive CrossFit, adaptive fitness, or sports, feel free to, you can check out my website, or I'm on Instagram mostly. It's runyourdays.com. So if you're looking again for any type of consultation or coaching, feel free to reach out, you know, whether it's an athlete or a gym owner. The goal is just to keep expanding the opportunity for as many people as we can. So let's get as many people into the door as we can and make fitness truly inclusive for all.
Heck yeah, dudes. And I'll get all of her contact information linked up in the show notes. So you can check her out, do all those things, like grow the network of inclusivity. Peace out, dogs.
Awesome. Bye, guys.